Hello everyone, xForts here, and welcome back to the channel for the JOJOLands Chapter 20 review. We're finally back from hiatus, and Araki returns with a splash for the November chapter, bringing this current arc to an unexpected but satisfying conclusion as everything begins to fall into place for the game's next endeavor, bringing us one step closer to Filthy Rich at the expense of Howlerco. But before we get into this chapter, let's talk Jojo Magazine, which has a brand new issue coming next month that just got its cover revealed, which is surprisingly not of any Joestars, but rather La Squadra Esecuzione, the beloved Hitman team from Part 5, which makes sense considering there is a large feature in the magazine titled All About the Hitman Team, and just in general is a very villain-themed magazine with other features including a Prosciutto and Pesci novella titled My Prize Hook and Line, also a Hazamada one-shot titled Hazamada's Questionable Adventure, that's Surface's user from Part 4 if anyone forgot, and another chapter of the recent Cool Shock Old BT series, this time titled Cool Shock Young BT, the Smoker Under Arms incident, which is described as a blast from the past that will parody Araki's first manga, Poker Under Arms. So 'tis the season for villains, as this magazine perfectly coincides with Araki's new book that just released this month, titled Hirohiko Araki's New Manga Techniques, How to Create a Villain, which I hope to eventually find a translation of so I can make some videos on that soon. And besides the villains, the other big feature we know about is titled Women Portrayed in JoJo, which includes 14 different topics and is all about the women throughout JoJo in all of the parts. So very exciting issue coming this winter season, and it might actually be the first JoJo magazine I import, considering the La Squadra cover is absolute fire, even if my boy Ghiaccio got snubbed. I barely even saw him when I first saw this. And another cool detail about this cover art is that it shares a composition with the latest cover of the JOJOLands Volume 5, and while the villains are giving thumbs down, our heroes are giving thumbs up. Nice touch, Araki. And both of these will be releasing on December 18th in Japan. So with all of that covered, let's get into the latest JOJOLands Chapter 20. Starting with the cover page, what's a November chapter without November rain, showing off its abilities surrounding Jodio with rainfall as he strikes a violent pose, giving off some Jotaro vibes. And turning the page, we are welcomed into the chapter with a double page spread showcasing the chaos ensuing at the hospital, as we see the panic on the main floor, followed by more pedestrians running away from Bobby as he unloads into the bathroom stalls trying to find Jodio. Going stall by stall, shooting the doors and looking underneath, being a bit defensive as he's making sure to maintain a safe distance, as from their fight in the last chapter, Bobby is quick to deduce November Rain's ability and range, saying his water drops are able to exert a formidable pressure and can easily pierce through muscle and bone, some slight foreshadowing. So after checking a few stalls with no luck, Bobby uses his stand to send out a barrage of slowed bullets into the base of the toilets that will all impact around the same time. So he's creating a danger zone on the whole ground, as it's pretty obvious Jodio's standing on one of these toilets, so if he falls, he's gonna hit that full impact. And during this scene, Bobby is using a mix of slowed bullets and regular bullets, so it looks like he can just swap between that as he pleases. But before this attack even reaches Jodio, he reveals his position with a cough, as he's still suffering from the internal attacks by Bag's Groove, prompting Bobby to shoot into the stall and forcing Jodio to respond with November Rain. We then get a handful of pages of Jodio deflecting the bullets, but is eventually overpowered by Bobby and Lulu's onslaught. As the toilet is destroyed, he's crawling on the ground and eventually will be unable to defend himself if the internal damage worsens. So in an act of desperation, Jodio reaches into his pocket, which reminds Bobby of this lava rock they have and thinks that's probably what he's reaching for, and takes a moment to reflect on its power and how it's allowed these kids to strip Howlerco of all of their money and land, so it's gotta be powerful. This makes Bobby reconsider his plan, and instead of shooting, decides to cut Jodio a deal, presumably sparing his life in exchange for the rock, keeping it for himself and betraying Howler. Although within this time spent thinking, Bobby failed to realize that the walls and ceiling of the room had been spattered with rain droplets from the deflected bullets, effectively extending Jodio's range. And in a moment of victory, Jodio reveals he never even had the rock, and in that split second, a droplet falls from the ceiling and pierces through the top of Bobby's head, killing him instantly. So it turns out Jodio reaching into his pocket wasn't a move of desperation, but rather trickery, to intentionally convince Bobby that he had this lava rock and then use it as leverage, which ultimately wins him the fight. Just an incredible Jodio moment, not only highlighting his stand's immense strength, but also his deceitfulness. So with Bobby out for the count, I gotta ask, what was his stand? Is Glory Days the gun, the silencer, maybe even the bullets? The gun didn't fade away or disappear after Bobby died, it just fell on the floor, so the stand could be bound to a physical object and maybe even used by others like Creamstarter. But as for its ability, from everything we saw, I would say its power was to freeze and slow bullets while retaining their full kinetic energy, and release them at will, which feels a bit like a mix between Kraftwerk and Sex Pistols from part 5, but overall, very D-tier stand. It had its moments, it was good at setting traps, but I'm still under the impression it's gun but worse. So following Bobby's death, the gang get extremely lucky that Lulu was following him, because seeing all of this happen just overwhelms her with sadness, as she runs to try and save him while recalling her stand from all infected, saving Jodio, and in a quick cut we also see that Usagi is finally back to normal, like 6 chapters later, with just a bit of memory loss, so apparently all of that internal damage, all of the bleeding, it's no big deal, he's good to go. Just JoJo thins. So for how big of a cop-out that is to easily defeat Lulu, I think it's important to identify why she called off her stand. It could have been her emotional state was so disrupted she couldn't control them anymore, or she was actually trying to save Bobby's life by using her stand. Although from what we've seen, it looks like Bag's Groove is a fully automatic stand with a set procedure, and the stand didn't go to Bobby, but rather they climb on top of Lulu's head, more like they were trying to comfort her or trying to protect her because she knows Bobby can't anymore. So it was more of a subconscious reaction. And in the end, we never got to outplay this stand, and we just get lucky after tanking hella damage. But considering the Lulu and Bobby dynamic, this does feel in character and like a logical outcome, as a few chapters ago Lulu was asking Bobby to adopt her so she could be his daughter, so she had already seen him as this father figure and looked up to him, which would explain why she was so upset by his death, enough to give up on her attack and be intimidated by Jodio. And honestly, better to end things quickly than to go another chapter fighting Bag's Groove. I'll take the easy one. So without any fear or remorse, Jodio approaches Lulu and says when she's done crying, she'll be leaving the hospital with their team, whether she likes it or not. Coming off super antagonistic, which is fair, she is the enemy, but just gives Jodio some edge in this scene. So if Giorno is a combination of Jonathan and Dio, so far Jodio feels much more like a mix of part 3 Jotaro and part 1 Dio. He's naturally neutral, but with a temper, highly intelligent, and very strong. The chapter then transitions into the second half, which is the fallout of the fight as we see the hospital is swarming with police. Meanwhile, Jodio and Dragona meet up with Paco in the ICU, who has somehow incurred more damage than Usagi during this arc, as Usagi is already elsewhere with Charming Man working on their escape. So after touching base, the gang get the general idea that Howler is sending assassins after them to retrieve the lava rock, and after this incident with cameras and eyewitnesses, it won't be long before he knows who he's looking for, so they really need to watch their backs. And as we are getting ready to leave, Jodio notices a briefcase in the locker with Paco's clothes, which Paco didn't even think to check out, where he finds the documents belonging to the patient lying next to them, who is the representative from Dolphin Bank who had confronted Howler in chapter 17, and through the power of the lava rock was influenced to come to this hospital, where he got caught in the crossfire and eventually led to this moment right here, where Jodio finding this case is the next step in the rock's process. And while we're investigating these documents, the gang noticed Mr. White and his daughter Sophie in the distance, where we see that Sophie did survive and looks to have made a full recovery. So at this point, I'm just assuming all damage done by the Bag's Grooves were instantly reverted when recalled. So we hear Mr. White's assistant is shocked that he signed these documents to seize the Hualala North Slope. He didn't actually sign it, it was Dragona who manipulated his fingerprint, but Mr. White convinces himself into believing that he did sign it, and that Howler deserves this because of their chemical terrorism. And I would guess that he is under some of the rock's influence here to believe he signed the papers, just making sure Howler's land is taken away smoothly. As this seizure of land from the government is crucial for the next step, as Jodio realizes he found contracts from Dolphin Bank that contain Howler's loan of $38 billion, with the Hualala land put up as collateral. So if the government goes after Howler, the bank would make sure they are repaid that $38 billion before that could happen, before that is taken away from him, and they could be paid in cash or the land itself, but since Howler has no money, he'd be forced to give over the land. So if the land transferred ownership from Howler to Dolphin Bank, the state wouldn't go after it anymore, as their main concern is with Howler's management. So without that pressure from Mr. White threatening Hualala, it would just maintain its full value and Howler wouldn't have any issues with the bank, thus not giving the gang an opening to steal. So I get it might seem a bit complicated when getting into all of the financial jargon, but I think that's the point Araki is trying to illustrate, that we are seeing how this lava rock is able to use the systems created by humans in order to perform a transition of wealth, going through that due process, which I'm sure is some sort of metaphor or lesson the story is going to reveal over time that connects to the concept of flow and energy seen in parts 7 and 8. And speaking of flow, when Jodio realizes the power in his hands, he declares that he'll use these documents to collect Howler's debt instead of Dolphin, proclaiming that the lava rock's flow is absolute. And I believe this is the first time Jodio has referred to its power as flow, showing that he understands it far greater than the rest of his team, and that's probably the reason why he found these documents in the first place. He is constantly aware of what's happening and how this ability works and looking for its signals, going on to say that the rule of the lava rock is telling us to do it. It's guiding them, they just need to follow it, and that they'll be able to take down Howler and the bank if they collect this debt. As earlier, Jodio said that the bank is even worse than Howler, so he doesn't mind taking them down too. And that brings us to the final page of the chapter, where Jodio, assuming that leader position, says they'll go back to Meryl's place next and bring the banker with them. So it looks like in the next chapter, Lulu and the banker will be at their headquarters unless they just let Lulu go, but it would give them a huge advantage, as I'm sure Jodio wants to keep Lulu to ask her some questions about Howler, who is he, if there are more assassins, and the banker will obviously be the key to actually using these documents, as they could force him to authorize transfers, or maybe just use his biometrics to bypass any securities. So it's very refreshing to see this arc come to a close, and coming up we'll get a breath of fresh air with a new enemy, setting, and maybe another heist to make sure we can collect this debt. So plot-wise, I think it's very solid so far in making satisfying and consistent headway. Really, my only question during all of this is, why did Howler take out a $38 billion loan? This man was born into generational wealth, already had Hualalai, is the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, and knows about the lava rocks, the infinite money glitch, but still takes out a loan and puts up his family's greatest asset as collateral, leaving no money to pay it off, saying he spent it all on new company offices. So the writing has to be making Aka out as kinda dumb on purpose, like the young and irresponsible CEO archetype, because he never should have put himself in this position to lose his land, which is essential to running his business, yet he still put it up as collateral and continued his illegal ventures, making him an easy target for the state. So maybe he just thought he was too big to fail and felt he could get away with anything. But I still don't get why he's taking out loans when he knows about the lava rocks, unless he didn't know where they were, or he just didn't have one for some reason. But then again, Rohan found them on his property, so once again, signs point to Howler being kinda dumb. But to be fair, there's still so much about Howler we don't know, so it's possible we're just missing a lot of key details that are yet to be revealed, and he could have been working on some sort of plan that we are now getting in the way of. So I would hope to see more from Howler's perspective in future chapters, and what his true motivations are with all of this illegal land activity we keep hearing about. So those are my thoughts and review of the JoJoLands chapter 20, but as always, let me know what you guys thought about this chapter down below in the comments, and any predictions you might have where you think the story is going. And also, like the video if you enjoyed, of course, subscribe if you're not already, and I'll talk to you all real soon in a new video. Until then, I'm out. Peace.